Organizations and individuals who wish to engage in business activities use contracts to ensure all parties are in agreement on specific activities or actions. While a verbal agreement may have the same intent, without a formal written agreement, some terms may be interpreted differently over time. In this presentation, I will review a brief background on contracts, what is required to form a contract and what constitutes an implied contract, how contracts are legislated, and an examination of various methods for performance, excuses for non-performance, discharge, and examples of ethical issues that have arisen. The Uniform Commercial Code, hereafter referred to as the UCC, is a body of recommendations for laws concerning buying and selling in the United States. These recommendations aim to ensure uniformity and fairness in business practices. Each state adopts a version of the UCC, permitting structural differences in the acts based on the local customs of each state. The UCC regulates the transfer or sale of personal property. The UCC does not address dealings in real property and contains separate provisions or rules for merchants and consumers. Contracts between merchants do not always contain specific terms. Most organizations contract to purchase using a purchase order, which will contain a description, quantity, and expected price for purchase, along with other requirements specific to the institution, like insurance requirements, delivery requirements, etc. Under the purchase order, acceptance and performance take place simultaneously when a vendor delivers the goods orders. Where these types of contracts occur, the UCC substitutes its provisions to fill the missing gaps. This provides a method for contracts to be more uniform across the U.S. Common law governs contracts for services as well as contracts not otherwise governed by the Uniform Commercial Code. Under common law, contract formation includes an offer, an acceptance, intent, and consideration or exchange of value. Common law contract requirements are stricter than those required under the UCC. The text, Business and the Legal and Ethical Environment, defines contracts as legally enforceable promises that, if breached, result in compensable damages. Contracts are a fundamental part of doing business, which require not only performance of the terms of the contract, but also good faith in dealing. The Cornell University Law School defines implied in fact contracts as those obligations arising from a mutual agreement and intent to promise, where the agreement and promise have not been expressed in words. Implied contracts must demonstrate a specific offer, specific acceptance, mutual intent to be obligated, and an exchange of consideration in order to be enforceable. Some ethical issues surrounding contract formation include the abuse of good faith and the undue influence one party may wield over another. An example of the abuse of good faith doctrine occurred in the case Locke v. Warner Brothers Incorporated in 1977. Clint Eastwood and Sandra Locke had a long-term relationship that eventually deteriorated and allegedly ended on unfriendly terms. Locke sued Eastwood for various causes of action. In settlement of the case, Eastwood offered to secure a development deal for Locke with Warner Brothers. Locke entered into the settlement agreement, receiving $250,000 per year for 3 years. Over the course of these 3 years, Locke submitted 30 projects to Warner Brothers, who declined to develop any of them. Though Locke was unaware at the time, Eastwood had agreed to reimburse Warner Brothers if Locke was unsuccessful in developing a project with Warner Brothers. Locke took legal action, asserting the agreement with Warner Brothers was a sham, and the company never intended to develop any projects with her. Evidence was brought forward supporting her allegation, and the California Appellate Court agreed, specifying in their opinion their belief that because Warner Brothers never intended to develop Locke's projects, they had acted in bad faith. Undue influence occurs when one individual wields power over another, such as the influence a caregiver may have over their patient, a religious advisor may have over a member of their congregation, or an employer may have over an employee. In the case Johnson versus Buttress, an illiterate and elderly man, Buttress, relied on his caregiver, Johnson, to help him with his daily needs. While he was living, Buttress transferred his land to Johnson, his caregiver, as thanks for the service she had provided. When Buttress died, his son argued that the decision to give the land to Johnson was made under undue influence. The courts ruled that Johnson was in a position to exercise undue influence over Buttress because of his extensive reliance on her, and awarded the land to Buttress' son. A couple of ethical issues going on there. Performance is the fulfillment of a contractual obligation and results in a discharge of the contract. Performance can be complete or substantial. Complete performance means that all actions and requirements of the contract have been completed as described by the contract. The obligations expire and the contract is discharged or terminated. According to the Cornell University Law School, a substantial performance is a lenient standard for contracting parties to meet that permits variation in performance that does not deviate greatly from that required by the contract. Where one party to the contract substantially performs their promise, the other party is obligated to perform theirs, but may obtain damages such as remuneration or specific performance at the cost of the first party for the deviations. For example, you contract with a builder to construct a home according to your plans and specifications. Most people build a home because they cannot find exactly what they are wanting in existing pre-built homes, so it's important that the builder provide all of the options you requested, from specific kitchen appliances to the paint on the walls and the baseboards. The builder notifies you that construction is complete, and you meet to do the final walkthrough and inspection. This reveals that the builder painted your 6-month-old baby girl's room black and your 16-year-old boy's room pink. In this situation, the builder has substantially performed according to the terms of the contract. However, because the performance was not complete, you, the homeowner, may seek damages from the builder. Damages could consist of the builder repainting both rooms or offering a reduction in the cost of the contract in exchange for you repainting the rooms yourself. The contract is discharged upon agreement and performance of the damages. Sometimes we can't see all of the work that a builder performs. We don't see the ductwork or wiring or plumbing encased in the foundation and brickwork. However, cities, counties, and states require periodic inspections of these items during construction to ensure that construction is accomplished according to codes of safety that have been established. Unfortunately, graft or bribery can still be a significant problem. However, as more governmental entities embrace transparency, more of these problems can be avoided. Parties who fail to perform their contractual obligations may be able to avoid breach and excuse performance if the failure was due to a legally acceptable reason. Such reasons include prevention, intervening illegalities, destruction of the contract subject matter, impracticability or unforeseen events, and frustration of purpose. Prevention occurs when one party's interference prevents the performance of the contract, excusing the other party from their duties under the contract and discharging or terminating the contract. The interfering party's actions must be substantial and cause the other party's inability to perform. Intervening illegality occurs when the subject matter of the contract becomes illegal due to a change in the law. Where this condition has been determined, the contract is excused and discharged due to the illegality. An example of an intervening illegality that contains some ethical issues is the Family Smoking Prevention Act and Control Act that President Obama signed into law on June 22nd of 2009. The act grants the FDA greater authorities with regard to the marketing and advertising of cigarettes and smokeless tobacco, and banned tobacco companies from sponsoring sports and entertainment events. The new law did not take effect until June 22nd of 2010 in order to provide sporting events such as the NASCAR Cup Series time to find new sponsors. The law, established for the health and well-being of U.S. citizens, could have been in place much sooner. However, that would have greatly and negatively impacted many of the stakeholders involved with tobacco-sponsored events. So here, on one hand, the actualities of the act impacted the livelihoods of many people. It is accurate that smoking is an unhealthy and addictive habit, and perhaps approaches that aggrandize it should be eradicated. However, people associated with the sporting events still needed to take home a paycheck to feed their families. By providing a year for implementation, the opportunity was available for stakeholders to look to other sponsors and to keep people employed. A contract may be excused and discharged if performance becomes objectively and not subjectively impossible, such as when one of the parties to the contract dies or the specific subject matter of the contract is destroyed. An example of this impracticability arose from the tragedy on September 11th of 2001. Fortress Re Incorporated was a reinsurance agency that held a significant portion of the world's aviation reinsurance policies. Fortress managed the reinsurance pool of companies that underwrote all 4 planes involved in the hijackings on September 11, 2001. These losses associated with 9/11 exceeded $1.5 billion. As the manager, Fortress had the responsibility to maintain the pool and account and report for each contributing company's share. Fortress financial statements were prepared annually by Deloitte & Touche, who informed the Fortress owners, Maurice Sabah and Kenneth Kornfeld, of their belief that the financial statements and associated audit performed were not in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles and were intended for use solely by the Fortress management and the pool members. After 9/11, one of the member pool companies hired PricewaterhouseCoopers to inspect Fortress Re's accounting records. The inspection revealed that not only did Fortress have insufficient reinsurance, they had acquired financial reinsurance rather than conventional reinsurance. With financial reinsurance, the risk of loss does not transfer to the reinsurer. This was not disclosed on Fortress's financial statements and not disclosed to pool members. Fortress Re ceased operating shortly after 9/11. Unfortunately for the pool member companies, they bore the brunt of the lost payouts. Sadly, the ramifications of this incident impacted in unforeseen ways. Maurice Sabah was an extensive philanthropist who donated more than $100 million to the American Hebrew Academy, which he helped found. Because Fortress actions were fraudulent, the pool member companies sought recovery of amounts donated to the American Hebrew Academy and the Oklahoma City Community Foundation and settled out of court for an undisclosed amount. In addition to the settlement, the American Hebrew Academy and the Oklahoma City Community Foundation were not able to hold Sabah and his partner Cornwell to their contractual pledges of monetary support due to the eradication of their wealth. The last legal method to excuse a contract discussed in this presentation is known as frustration. Frustration occurs when a contract is excused and discharged because something has happened to make the consideration included in the contract worthless. The discharge of a contract terminates it and ideally results from complete performance of the contract terms. Discharge may also result from the agreement of the parties, waiver, breach, or by the intentional alteration of the contract. A discharge by agreement of the parties can occur when both parties mutually agree to end the contract. A discharge by waiver occurs when either party waives his right to insist on complete performance. A breach of contract occurs when a party to the contract does not perform the terms of the contract. Is it ethical to knowingly breach a contract? In today's business world, as manufacturing becomes outsourced and production costs decrease, some companies may find it less costly to breach a contract, pay the required damages, complete the contract with another party for a significantly lower amount, and still save money. In one instance, this could be deemed unethical, as the party who does not breach has relied upon the promise made in the contract. However, if a company has correctly determined the remuneration for a breach, which should be equal to the cost it would incur should a breach happen, then perhaps not. The actual breaking of a promise, however, is still largely considered unethical. In 2014, Natural Dairy Products and Dairy Smart asserted Trader Joe's breached its contract and broke its promise when the company allegedly approached suppliers without NDP or Dairy Smart's knowledge and asked them to sell directly to Trader Joe's and not use Natural Dairy Products or Dairy Smart as the middleman any longer. Contracts are promises that are enforceable. A good contract is one that is written and guides the parties to successful performance. However, as with any tool, contracts are used ethically and unethically, may contain ethical and unethical content, and may result in ethical and unethical performance and discharge. To increase the probability and incentive to perform, individuals and institutions should perform a requisite amount of research on the parties with whom they contract. The level of risk a party is willing to assume will dictate how involved such research should be. Publicizing the contract, especially a contract perceived as socially responsible, may increase the likelihood of complete performance by all parties. And where contracts cross borders and cultures, an extensive amount of research should be completed on the other country's laws, their treatment and interpretation of these laws, industry actions, and actions of the foreign company before entering into a contract. Thank you for listening and watching my performance.